So remarkable, absolutely remarkable. Okay, so let's take a break for 15 minutes. Now we're going to make things complicated. So this, I showed you this map before, and I produced this map because I was trying to understand the fundamental substructure of the mythological world. I think that's the right way of thinking about it. And I'm not claiming that this is the only way it can be represented, because I know full well that it can be represented other ways. But it's a pretty good schema. And so the idea, it maps onto this idea. So you can imagine that when you're here, you're in explored territory. Okay, so explored territory, explored territory in an archaic way is the fire's at the center, the campfire, and the tribal boundary surrounds that space. And that's safe space. Okay, so it's a place in nature, obviously, within which there's a pyramid. And there's a fire at the center of the pyramid. And the pyramid is the dominance hierarchy, the social dominance hierarchy. And that's where people live. That's the world. And so you could say, well, that's circumscribed space where you understand. See, it's explored territory not only because you understand the natural world that prevails there, and the cumulative effort of all of your compatriots keeps all the terrible animals at bay, so it's actually safe from a natural perspective, and you understand it, so it's explored. When you're there, you're safe, and good things happen to you, mostly. And then, but it isn't just the natural space construed as the environment, it's the natural space construed of the relationship between you and all the other primates that inhabit that space, which is also, it's society, obviously, but it's also part of nature. And so, that explored territory is your understanding of the natural world and the social world, but more importantly, the concordance of your understanding with what's happening in that space. So, like take this place for example right now. Every one of you has expectations about what's going to happen in this classroom, and you bring those, and they're desires actually, they're not merely expectations because it's goal directed, and you bring those with you into the classroom, and as long as what's happening is in concordance with those desires, then you're safe and calm, and maybe at least mildly interested, which would be the point, right? So it's explored territory because what you understand matches what's happening. And that's a place, and it's a place that you strive to be, and you strive to maintain, and maybe you even strive to expand, which is a slightly different thing, but you certainly strive to maintain it. That's this. That's one place. Then there's another place, which is where you end up when that doesn't work. And you can think about that as, well, you know, in The Lion King, for example, when Mufasa brings Simba up to the top of Pride Rock just when the sun is either rising or setting. And so they're on top of the rock, and the top of the rock is lit. And they're sitting at the top in the light, and Mufasa tells Simba that his territory is everything that the light touches. And everything that the light touches is everything that you've understood. It's everything that your capacity for illumination and enlightenment has turned into habitable space. And so you're the king of that domain, right? Especially insofar as you're guided by the light. That's what that little scene meant. And Mufasa tells Simba not to go out beyond where the light has touched into the dark territories. And that's where the elephant graveyard is in that story, right? And Simba and Nala go out there because, of course, as soon as you tell a human being not to do something, those little lions being human beings after all, they immediately run off and do it. And that's an echo of the story, say, in Genesis, where God tells Adam and Eve not to eat the apple, and it's the first thing they immediately do. Because if you want someone not to do something, you first specify it, what it is that they shouldn't do, and then give them some sort of incomprehensible reason for why they shouldn't do it, and they'll just do it instantly, because that's what we're like, right? That's why the Catholics are convinced that people suffer from original sin, and it's a very intelligent way of looking at things, although it also has its problems. So anyways, there's the known territory, and then outside of that there's unknown territory. And those are the most fundamental elements of existence. There's the place you are when you know what's going on, and there's the place you are when you don't know what's going on. And that can be mapped onto geographic territory. If you go on beyond the borders of your society, then you're in unknown territory. But it can also be mapped conceptually, so that, for example, we're all sitting in this room and someone leaps in with a weapon. It's like this was known territory a second ago, and now it's not known territory at all. Even though you'd say, well, many things have remained the same. It's like, yeah, but all the relevant things have suddenly changed, right? And so part of the way of conceptualizing that is that you can manifest a geographic transformation by moving from, you know, genuine geographic explored territory into genuine geographic unexplored territory. But you can do that in time as well, because we exist in time as well as space. And so a space that's stable and unchanging can be transformed into something completely other than it is by the movement forward of time. So why am I telling you that? It's because we've mapped the idea of the difference in space between the known and the unknown to the difference in time between a place that works now and a place that no longer works. Even though it's the same place. It's the same thing. It's just extended across time. All right, and so that's order versus chaos, and that's the chaos that can manifest itself within the order, the thing that's represented in the yin and yang symbol, right? Because you see the black paisley with the white dot in it and the white paisley with the black dot in it. Order can turn into chaos at a moment's notice. And in the same way, chaos can turn to order in a moment's notice, at a moment's notice. And so we're trying to map the geography onto something that's more abstract and comprehensive. And we do that using conceptual schemes that we evolved over vast spans of time and have just moved up one level of abstraction. Known territory, or what's explored. Unknown territory, or what's not explored. The transformation or the dissolution of one into the other, and then the reconstitution of that. That's what an election does, right? It's like, okay, we have our leader, who's the person at the top of the dominance hierarchy and defines the nature of this particular structure. There's an election. It's regulated chaos. No one knows what's going to happen. It's the death of the old king. Bang, we go into a chaotic state. Everyone argues for a while. And then out of that argument, they produce a consensus, and poof, we're in a new state. Right? That's the metastory, right? Order, chaos, order. But it's partial order, chaos, reconstituted and revivified order. That's the thing, is that this order is better than that order. So there's progress. And that's partly why I think the idea of moral relativism is wrong. There's progress in moral order. And it was defined properly by Piaget. The new moral order does everything the old moral order did, and some additional things. That's what constitutes progress. Now, here's a strange idea. And we'll talk about this more as we progress through the class. What's the ultimate in order? Well, it's not this, obviously, because it can collapse. And it's not this, because it can collapse. And so then you think, well, there's no ultimate order, even though there's progression. But then you have to move it up one level of abstraction. What's the ultimate order? Doing this. Willingness to do that. That's the ultimate order. Right? It's order at a different level of analysis, and you can see that's what's represented in that idea. That's what that idea means. That's the phoenix, right? The phoenix is something that lives, ages, and then allows itself to be consumed by fire, and then reemerges. And the old phoenix gets old and burns, and the new phoenix reemerges. And so the real phoenix is the thing that's constant across those transformations. That's the Jungian self. That's what he meant. The self is the element of the psyche that remains intact across transformations. Yeah, it's a bloody amazing idea. That's for sure. And you could think about that. That's why Jung claimed, for example, in Ion, primarily, that Christ was a symbol of the self. That was his consequence of decades of meditation on the structure of Christianity. Because it's the dying and resurrecting part of the psyche that remains constant across the transformation. So the ultimate order isn't to identify with this. That's your current state of being. And it isn't to identify with that because, well, you can't by definition. And it isn't even to identify with that. It's to let these things go as they need to go. That's a sacrifice. And to allow this continual process of transformation to occur. And part of that is the admission that you're wrong. And so partly what you're doing is, at micro levels and at macro levels, where are you not what you could be? And when you realize that, it'll take you apart a little bit and burn you down to your core a little bit, and then allow you to regenerate. And if you do that continually, then everything that you don't need burns away, right? And that's what this means. You remember in Harry Potter, you may remember that Harry goes down, so in the second volume and in the second movie, Harry's at Hogwarts, so it's the school where you learn how to be magic, because that's what you really are. And there's something that threatens the school. Well, part of what threatens the school? Evil, right? Voldemort, that's one thing. But at the same time, it's also the snake that lurks underneath. It's the basilisk that threatens the school. And so the basilisk is the dragon, and when the basilisk looks at you, then you're paralyzed because you're a prey animal, and if a predator captures you in its gaze, you freeze. And the reason you freeze is because your body reacts to the predator as something that should turn you to stone. Sorry about that. So what do you do about the basilisk? Well, one thing you do is you run and hide. But the other thing you do is go confront it in its lair, and that's what Harry Potter does now. And what's interesting about him is he's also touched by evil, right? And that means that he's an embodiment of what Jung would regard as someone who's integrated the shadow. And without that capacity, he isn't able to communicate, say, with snakes. And that's not so good, because since there are snakes, it's not such a bad idea to know how to communicate with them. And he goes down into the underground, right, into the chaotic domain that's underneath the school in order to find the snake in its lair. Now, if I remember correctly, you tell me if I'm wrong. Doesn't he go down through a bathroom? Through a toilet? Right. Well, so that's an indication of the Jungian dictum that what you need most is to be found where you least want to look. I had a client once who actually had a dream like that. He dreamt that he had to go into the underground world through an outhouse. Right. It was very, very interesting. And it was an elaboration of precisely this theme. It's what you've thrown away as of little value to you, and maybe what you hate and hold in contempt and fear, is exactly what you have to face if you want to go down to the place where the transformations occur. So what happens in Harry Potter? Well, this basilisk is wandering around, paralyzing everyone who isn't able to communicate with snakes. And he doesn't fight the basilisk precisely. He goes down into its lairs, the underground world. And that, what down there is that snake has got Ginevra, right? His girlfriend, that's her name, right? It's a variant of Virginia. That's a variant of virgin. And the snake always has a virgin. That's one of its characteristics, right? Like gold. He goes down there to rescue her. What happens to him? He gets bit, and he's going to die. So what happens? The phoenix comes along and cries tears into his wounds and cures him. And that's... So the idea is that what saves you in the encounter with the snake is your capacity to let things go and die and come back to life. Right. It's so interesting, that story's told in that way in that series of volumes, because the plot structure is perfect in a mythological sense. It's exactly right. And the phoenix actually happens to be the pet of the main wizard, which is also perfect. It's exactly right. So, you know, what's his name? Dumbledore. Yeah, he's basically, for all intents and purposes, God the Father. And his pet, his close ally, is the thing that can die and that transforms. Well, you can see the echoes of Christian thought in that, but that isn't exactly right. It's that Christian thought and the mythological substructure upon which the Harry Potter volume is based are drawing from the same underlying pool of ideas and symbols. And they're universally accessible, and you can tell that because if they weren't, that book wouldn't have sold. How many million copies? How many million copies did it sell? And the movies.